What's up, friends? Welcome in to an all-new episode of the Pack a Day Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can follow the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that little like button, and of course, check out those Pack a Day Podcast YouTube memberships as well. I have a simply fun episode for you today. At least I think it's fun. I don't know. Maybe some of you will, maybe some of you won't. But what I wanted to do is look at this roster for Green Bay right now, which we know is young, up and coming, but super talented, and compare them to the two most recent Super Bowl winning rosters, 2010 and 96. And how does this roster compare to those two teams that won Super Bowls? Now we're talking different eras here, 96, 2010, 2024. A lot of time has passed. It's a different brand of football, but then we're still talking modern football for the most part. Either way, you get a feel for the talent at these different positions. You get a feel for where the strengths and weaknesses were with individual teams. And I just think it's fun to sort of compare how far does Green Bay in this 2024 team need to go to match the success and the talent of those two Super Bowl winning teams. So we're going to go position by position, see which group had the best position group, which season had the best position group, and where the 2024 team ranked among their peers of those Super Bowl teams. I understand that this is maybe slightly unfair because, again, this is a young up-and-coming team, and the 96 and 2010 teams are Super Bowl champions. So that's a tough ask. But are they close, or are they still ridiculously far away? That is what we want to try and determine today. All right, quarterback. Let's start with an easy one. Who do you want, Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers? That debate's never happened before. All right, so the 2024 Packers, of course, Jordan Love, Sean Clifford, and Michael Pratt. 2010, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Flynn, and Graham Harrell. And then in 96, you had Brett Favre, Jim McMahon, and Doug Peterson. I'm going to clearly put Jordan Love's group third. I don't think anyone's going to argue with me on that. I'm sorry. Love was really fantastic a season ago, but we're talking 2010 Rodgers and 96 Favre. Like, I'm sorry, Jordan Love, and maybe he has a season that rivals those two, but until we see it, I'm going to go with the more proven commodities there. The question is, do you want 96 or do you want 2010? The world is your oyster. Have it whichever way you want. For this, I'm going to go 96. I'm going to go 96 because I believe that Favre was further into the peak of his powers, where Rodgers was just beginning to really scratch the surface of what he was becoming as a All-Pro, Hall of Fame, MVP quarterback. I think Favre was further into his progression of that. And I also believe that you had two experienced, or at least Jim McMahon was a experienced backup quarterback, and then Doug Peterson would go on to have a like 15-year journeyman backup quarterback career. So I'm going to go Favre, McMahon, and Peterson. If you want to argue Rodgers, Flynn, and Harrell, again, be my guest. It's a coin flip either way. But I'm going to say Favre, McMahon, Peterson 1, Rodgers, Flynn, and Harrell 2, and then Jordan Love, Sean Clifford, and Michael Pratt come in third on the list. Clearly, if Jordan Love continues to progress and takes a solid step up from where he was a season ago, he's not far from 2010 Rodgers. Like, it's not that far away. Like, he can be in that conversation with a really good year this year. That's still a tough ask to talk about being in the conversation with two of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. So we'll still put Love and his, group of Clifford and Pratt third on this list. Still some work to do, clearly, to get to that level. But again, we saw the promise in Jordan Love from a season ago, and now the question is just how high of a ceiling does he have, and how high of a ceiling can he get to, and can it even remotely come close to the greatness that was Rodgers and Favre? I think the early indications are there's a pathway to doing exactly that. Running back, I am going 2024 Packers with the best group here. 96 certainly in the conversation. 2024, Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, and A.J. Dillon. In 2010, you had Ryan Grant, who went down injured early in that year, and then you were left with Brandon Jackson, James Starks, Dimitri Nance, and to some extent, John Kuhn, who they used as a running back a good deal in that season as well. And then 96 was Edgar Bennett, Dorsey Levens, and Travis Jervey. is another one where if you want to argue 96 with Bennett and Levens, I will totally understand that and could totally hear that side of things and understand why you would want to go with that number one. I think Josh Jacobs has a little bit more upside and talent than Levens or Bennett did. Now, we know Levens turned out to be a really good running back. I'm going to go Jacobs. I think Marshawn Lloyd has all the talent in the world to be a really good number two. And A.J. Dillon as your number three is just a really, really nice third piece to have, which, again, I think is a step up from certainly where Travis Jervey was in that season. So I'm actually going to lean towards the 2024 team. Now, if Jacobs is 2023 Jacobs and doesn't really show any progression, then I think this just goes clearly to 96. But I think if you had to ask me at, looking at the beginning of 96, the beginning of 2010, and the beginning of 2024, I would have taken the group at the beginning of 2024 with Jacobs, Lloyd, and Dillon. The second group would have been Bennett, Levens, and Jervey. And then third would have been Brandon Jackson, James Starks, John Kuhn, Dimitri Nance, and then again, Ryan Grant, who was injured the majority of that season. Fullback, we're not going to count this one. It's just kind of an aside. It's not a big enough position to really put into the scheme of things. Green Bay, I guess, has Henry Pearson. I don't think he is probably going to make the 53, but as of now, they have Henry Pearson. The 2010 Packers had Corey Hall, Quinn Johnson, and John Kuhn, which is ridiculous in so many ways that they won a Super Bowl with three fullbacks on the roster, but I digress. And then the 96 team had William Henderson. Even though the 2010 team had three fullbacks, I'm going William Henderson here. He was just such a phenomenal fullback. Yeah, John Kuhn, really good as well. And of course, you had Hall and Quinn Johnson, but I'm going 96 with William Henderson, followed by 2010 with Hall, Quinn Johnson, and John Kuhn, and then 2024 with Henry Pearson. We're not counting this one. This is just a bonus one and a side one, but we'll go with William Henderson on this one. Wide receiver, interesting. This one is between 2024 and 2010. We'll go over 96 first. They had Antonio Freeman. Remember, Robert Brooks got injured early in that year. Don Beebe, Andre Rison, who they picked up midway through the year, Desmond Howard, primarily a kick returner, Derek Mays, and Terry Mickens. Good wide receiver group, but the Brooks injury really hurt it. Now, we have to be a little bit fair here because we don't know what injuries will strike in 2024. We do know what injuries struck in 2010 and in 96, but I'm still going to say that the third place group here is actually the 96 group. I'm going to go number one, 2010, Greg Jennings, Donald Driver, Jordy Nelson, James Jones, and Brett Swain. Now, some of these guys were not quite peak of their powers. Jennings was the one that was really still completely in his prime, and that was still early for him, but he was phenomenal. Nelson was still on the way up. Driver was a little bit on the way down. James Jones definitely on the way up. And then, Brett Swain didn't really amount to much, but a really good group of four wide receivers in 2010. Could Dobbs, Watson, Reed, Wicks, Melton rival that? Yeah, I think they really could. But I'm still, as of right now, going to lead towards 2010 with Jennings, Driver, Nelson, and Jones. Then number two is the current group with Dobbs, Watson, Reed, Wicks, Melton, and Heath. And then 96 comes in third with Freeman, Brooks, Beebe, Rison, Howard, Mays, and Mickens. Tight end. I'm going 96 on this one. Keith Jackson, Mark Chmura, and Jeff Thomason. Thomason would be a longtime journeyman tight end. Mark Chmura and Keith Jackson, both players played extremely well in 96. Of course, you had the Keith Jackson holdout and things like that. But Jackson, Chmura were fantastic. A really great 1-2 tight end punch. Number two is Musgrave, Kraft, and Sims. I think Musgrave and Kraft can get to that Jackson Chmura level. I really do. And I think they could become even better than that. But at this point, year two players for Musgrave and Kraft, I'll give the nod to Chmura and Keith Jackson with Thomason as three. Musgrave, Kraft, and Sims is the second best of this group. And then the 2010 group, yes, they had Jermichael Finley, but he did get injured a huge part of that year. Then Andrew Corliss, Donald Lee, and Tom Crabtree. Tom Crabtree probably should put it to the top of the list, but I'm actually going the 2010 team is third. Current group is second. Keith Jackson, Chmura, and Thomason goes to the top of the list. Offensive tackle. How about this in 2010? Chad Clifton, Brian Bulaga, TJ Lang, who remember did start his career as a tackle before he kicked out inside. Mark Tauscher was on that team, but got hurt early in the year. And they also had Marshall Newhouse, who also would eventually get hurt. But I mean, Clifton, Bulaga, TJ Lang, Mark Tauscher, Marshall Newhouse. What a group of five offensive linemen. Just at the tackle position on that 2010 team. Again, unfortunately, some injuries hit, but they had the depth to deal with it. Number 2, I'm going with the 96 team. Earl Dotson, Ken Rutgers, John Michaels, and Bruce Wilkerson. A lot of those guys had to play that season. All 4 of them were quality starting offensive tackles. So I'm going with them as number 2. And then the current team is number 3. Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom, Jordan Morgan, Andre Dillard, and Travis Glover. So the nod here goes to 2010 with the embarrassment of riches at offensive tackle that year. Interior offensive line, I'm going 96 with Frank Winters, Adam Timmerman, and Aaron Taylor making up the starting group, Lindsey Knapp and Jeff Dellenbach as the backups. You can maybe make an argument for a couple other ones here, but I think 96 is the best. Followed by 2010, had Josh Sitton and Darren College, Scott Wells, Jason Spitz, and Nick McDonald, as well as Evan Dietrich Smith. And then Elton Jenkins, Sean Ryan, Josh Myers, Jacob Monk, and also Jordan Morgan comes in third of that group for the current Green Bay team. All right, we're going to go to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive line. This is a ridiculously tough one to try to figure out. I'm going as the top group is 2010. They had BJ Raji, Cullen Jenkins, and Kenny Pickett as starters. All 3 very good players that year. Howard Green, of course, had the massive play in the Super Bowl. CJ Wilson and Jarius Wynn were both rotational players. And then Justin Harrell was out injured, as he was basically his entire career in Green Bay. I am second going with the current group. You've got Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, TJ Slayton, and Colby Wooden. I think there's enough depth there, plus a really good player in Kenny Clark, the upside of Wyatt and Brooks and Slayton and Wooden. I'm going them second because of the depth, but my goodness, 96. I mean, 2 all-time really good defensive linemen in Gilbert Brown and Santana Dotson. I mean, that group in the middle was so dominant. You had Dotson, who was a good pass rusher, and Gilbert Brown, a super talented run defender. And then you had Darius Holland and Bob Kuberski backing up. I could honestly make an argument for them being first, but I'm going with the Jenkins, Pickett, Raji group as number 1, Clark, Wyatt, Brooks, Slayton, Wooden as 2, and then Brown, Dotson, Holland. I kind of want to put 96 second just because of Gilbert and Dotson. It's a really, really tough one. I'll stick with my gut. I'll go with Brown, Dotson, Holland, and Kuberski third. But my goodness, that was a good group too, specifically because of Gilbert Brown and Santana Dotson. All right, edge rusher. Top 1, 96, Reggie White, Sean Jones, Gabe Wilkins, and Keith McKenzie. Wilkins and McKenzie were both solid rotational players, but you had Sean Jones and the freaking Minister of Defense. That's number 1. Sorry, nothing else is competing. The current group is number 2. Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, LVN, Kingsley Enagbare, and Brenton Cox. I think you have a really good rotation there. The 2010 team is the worst of the 3, but you do get prime Clay Matthews, who was a menace and a terror in that season. Would you take Clay Matthews and his high-level play with a bunch of guys over the current group? It's an interesting discussion. I'll stick with the current based on depth and talent, but Clay Matthews was that dude. He was that freaking good. They had Clay Matthews, Frank Zombo, Eric Walden, Dyrell Briggs, and then you had injured Mike Neal and Brady Papinga. But I'm going to go 96 as 1, current group is 2, and 2010 as 3rd. Linebacker, it's another tough one. You could make probably an argument for either 2010 or 96 here. I'm going 96. They had Wayne Simmons, Brian Williams, George Kuntz, Bernardo Harris, Ron Cox, and Lamont Hollenquist. Just a group of good linebackers. Of course, Wayne Simmons had some really good years. So did Kuntz. So did Brian Williams. I'm going with so did Bernardo Harris for that matter. And Ron Cox played a lot that year as well. I'm going with the 96 group, followed by 2010, AJ Hawk, Desmond Bishop, Rob Francois, and Matt Wilhelm. Also Nick Barnett, Brad Jones, Brandon Schiller, and Spencer Havner. Tight end linebacker extraordinaire Spencer Havner all were injured throughout that year. But your group of Barnett, Schiller, Brad Jones, AJ Hawk, Desmond Bishop, that's a really good group. If they would have all stayed healthy that year, you could make an argument for them as well. And then I'm going to go Cooper Walker, Tyron Hopper, Isaiah McDuffie, and Eric Wilson as the clear number 3 there. Corner, I'm going 2010 without a shadow of a doubt. Tramon Williams, Sam Shields, Charles Woodson, Pat Lee, Jarrett Bush, Brandon Underwood, and Josh Gordy. You remember Josh Gordy. They've got my favorite trio, like 3 of my top 5 favorite Packers of all time. Tremont Williams, Sam Shields, and Charles Woodson. I loved all three of those guys. Tremont was literally close to being a shutdown corner that year. He was phenomenal. Charles Woodson was Defensive Player of the Year. He was just a whole nother level. He completely and utterly changed the scope of that defense. I've talked about this before. He was another outside linebacker, a slot corner, and a do-it-everything guy, a blitzer off the... He did everything. He single-handedly made it so that he could be on the field and you could be playing base and nickel simultaneously. If you wanted to count it as a base, what it basically amounted to was BJ Raji at nose tackle, Cullen Jenkins and Frank Zombo as your defensive ends, Clay Matthews and Charles Woodson as your outside linebackers. And Woodson was that good as a run defender and as a blitzer that he could basically be a 3-4 outside linebacker. And then you had AJ Hawk and Desmond Bishop as your inside linebackers. It served as a 3-4 defense in a base defense without having to take anyone off the field. And then they go with 3 wide receivers or 11 personnel. All right, cool. Now Frank Zombo and Clay Matthews are your edge rushers. Jenkins and Raji are your interior pass rushers. AJ Hawk and Desmond Bishop are your off-ball linebackers. And now you've got Woodson in the slot as a true corner with Shields and Williams on the outside. He's a single, one-man, multiple defense. That's how good he was. So, and then you've got 2 amazing corners and Shields and Williams on the outside. Yeah, that 2010 group I'm going with every single time. Not a ton of depth after the top 3. Jarrett Bush did come up with that huge pick in the Super Bowl, though. Number 2, Doug Evans, Craig Newsome, Tyrone Williams, and Bucky Brooks, the 96 group. Yes, that Bucky Brooks. Newsome, Evans, and Tyrone Williams were a very good trio in 96, so I'm going with them. And then the current group, you've got Jair, but then you've got question marks. Eric Stokes, Carrington Valentine, Keyshawn Nixon, Corey Ballantyne, and Kalen King. Clearly, to me, number 3 of that group. Safety, this is another fantastic discussion. I'm going 96 as I think the mostly clear number 1. Leroy Butler, Hall of Famer. Eugene Robinson played unbelievable that year. Mike Pryor had some really big plays, and then Roderick Mullen didn't really matter. But you had 3 good safeties and 2 phenomenal starters, again, including Leroy Butler in his prime. I'm going the current group as number 2, which is hard for me because Nick Collins in anyone is amazing, and I kind of want to put 2010 ahead of it simply because of Nick Collins. Atari Bigby was on that team, but wasn't really doing anything yet. He didn't really become a starting caliber player yet. Morgan Burnett was hurt, and Charlie Pepper was the number 2, who was sort of kind of the weak spot of that defense. He played fine, but it was Charlie Pepper. There was only so much he could do. Nick Collins and stuff is better than most safety groups in the history of the Packers. But I'm going to bet here on Xavier McKinney being really good and the upside of the other safeties. You could easily go 2010 here just because of Nick Collins. But I think enough of Xavier McKinney, and I think Bullard, Williams, Oladapo, Anthony Johnson Jr., I think you have more depth and talent than that 2010 team did. But just Nick Collins alone makes me want to completely reconsider that entire topic, if I'm being honest. All right, special teams. I'm going 2010 here. Mason Crosby, Tim Mastay, and Brett Good, mostly due to the long snapper. I think the 96 team, you had Chris Jackie, good kicker, Craig Hentrick, the best punter in my lifetime for Green Bay, and then Jeff Dellenbach. But Dellenbach was sort of a late season, long snapper only. It wasn't great. Brett Good was the dude. Brett Good was the dude at long snapper. Played for Green Bay for forever. He was Mr. Consistency. Mastay was a good punter, and Mason Crosby was just kind of hitting his prime a little bit there. So I'm going to go Crosby, Mastay, and Good as 1, Jackie, Hentrick, and Dellenbach as 2, and Anders Carlson, Daniel Willen, and whoever wins that long snapper spot, quite frankly, whoever wins the kicker spot as well, as clearly number 3 on that list. So where does that leave your 2024 Packers? They had the 3rd best quarterback group, the 1st running back group, the 2nd best wide receiver, 2nd best tight ends, 3rd best tackles, 3rd best interior offensive line, 2nd best interior defensive tackles, 2nd best edge rushers, 3rd best linebackers, 3rd best corners, 2nd best safeties, 3rd best specialists. a lot of those were close. Either like they were third, but they could have been second, maybe second, but could have been first, or second that could have been third. Like a lot of these were pretty close, but I think it's fair to say, and what we all would have predicted, the 2024 team, the worst of the three groups, right? That's what you'd expect. The other two teams literally won the Super Bowl. But a lot of these conversations, like I said, were very close, and you can see the vision at almost all of these positions, where if things go right, we could be talking about some of these groups as or more talented than maybe some of those groups in 96 or 2010. Now, do they have a prime Reggie White, Clay Matthews, Charles Woodson, Tramon Williams? You get my point here. Those are the questions that this team is going to have to answer. They have good players all throughout the roster. Can they have great ones? Can they have transcendent talents that help you win Super Bowls? Those are the hard players to come by. Those are the hard players to develop. And that is the next step for this 2024 team. But hopefully in a couple of years, when we're talking about this team, hopefully whenever that is, hoisting a Lombardi trophy, we can look back and compare these teams again. And it'll be interesting to do so. Like I said, hopefully once they do raise another Lombardi, and we can compare them then a little bit better to maybe the 2010 and the 96 teams. Of course, job number one, getting to that Super Bowl and finding a way to win that game. That is going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this fun look back at the 2010 and 96 teams and seeing where the 2024 team compares to all of them. Shout out to our Hall of Fame and All-Pro members, Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Shea Dad, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donna Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Dan Miller, Alex Huang, Arnaldo Espinoza, Peter Ritaka, Caleb Cookster, and SoCal Pack. See you guys tomorrow. Until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.